I'm saying when you're saying the Big Bang is true, right? Evolution is true. We have so much evidence, or we have so much proof, right?
Yep, tons of evidence. And it's not just, so somebody can look at, there's this protein, and the diagrams of the protein in a book draw it as vaguely cross-shaped. And people say that's evidence, proof that God is real, which is completely stupid. Because what they did was they took something that was discovered and then retroactively said, oh, the God of the Bible did that. Whereas what we have, what scientists, real scientists have, is predictive models that ended up coming true. We actually can do prophecies.
How so?
That's how science works. So you come up with a tentative explanation and then you test it. Most of those explanations are discarded because the evidence doesn't hold up, but we have an enormous body of work of proven hypotheses.
Okay, so you don't believe in biblical prophecy?
No.
You don't believe in any of them?
So, like, did Jesus ride into Bethlehem on 2 donkeys? Maybe, but literally anybody that had access to the old scriptures that said that could see that it said that could do that. In no way is that miraculous or special.
The Jews at the time, their depiction of the Messiah was nothing like that. There was no self-sacrifice that they were expecting whatsoever. So it would be completely random for somebody to make something like that up 1,500 years later, right, when the community was not expecting a Messiah whatsoever to do anything like that, which is why it was so rejected amongst a lot of Jews.
Okay, what does that have to do with anything?
I mean, it kind of just points to evidence that it's not made up. Like, there would be no reason to make that up because it would go against the expectation of the coming Messiah.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I know a guy. His name's Justin. His channel's called the Deconstruction Zone, where he goes into this in really great detail. He talks about what the Messiah is actually supposed to do, and things that are supposed to happen. He's supposed to be called Emmanuel. Jesus is absolutely never called Emmanuel. All the nations are supposed to live in peace. Right? God is with you, or something like that.
God with us. That's all that means.
Yeah, but he's supposed to be called that, and is never called that. He's supposed to sit
he'll be called
on
God
the
with
throne.
us.
He's supposed to sit on the throne of King David. That absolutely does not happen. All the kingdoms on earth are supposed to live in peace. That obviously never happens. The kingdom is supposed to be here on earth, not in heaven. So there was a rebranding. We'll just say it that way. But you're not talking to somebody who is smart enough in this area.
All right, I guess why? Like, what's your reasoning for believing that the Earth is billions of years old? What's the best evidence?
We can see for billions of light years, for one, and we've figured out dating methods, and Earth is certainly billions of years old.
Sure, but I guess, like, why are we trusting the legitimacy of or the accuracy of the dating methods? Like, why do we?
The same reason you would test any kind, or the same reason you would trust any kind of scientific evidence, because it goes through an extremely rigorous process.
Sure, but the issue with, like, any scientific process is the fact that you don't have an objective truth to refer to.
How would that help in any way?
Well, I mean, if you have something that you can refer back to that's concrete, that does not move, that is the truth, like an answer key, right? Like in a test.
How would the universe itself not be that?
How would the universe itself not be that?
Yeah. Does the universe exist?
Yes, the universe exists.
Okay, if that's true, then there ought to be a subset of other true propositions contained within that universe regarding the nature of this universe. This whole thing about, but you don't have something ultimate to appeal to. If I claimed I did have something ultimate to appeal to, then couldn't I get away with saying things that aren't true and then just say, but I'm appealing to the ultimate source of truth?
No, if you were appealing to the ultimate source of truth, it would be true.
Yeah. And so what you've done here is you've said, well, this scientific evidence, which I accept in any aspect of my life, but I'm going to say it's not true because it disagrees with this thing that I have said is the objective standard of truth, which is exactly
Sure.
what I just said somebody could do.
Sure, right. But like, let's say you come to the conclusion that the Bible is true, you would then have to concede that a lot of the findings in science must have it wrong, right? Like when people make the argument,
that
like,
means.
okay, so when people make the argument that creationism could not be true, the creation story could not be true because the earth was made before the sun or something in the creation story, and vice versa.
That definitely didn't happen.
Yeah, perfect example, right? If the creation story was true, though, you would have to concede that we just came across wrong findings, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
If any claim is false and a different claim is true, then the other claim is false and the other claim is true. We haven't
sure, and
you haven't moved the
fact,
needle of truth here in any way whatsoever.
yes, but given the fact that science has changed, right, so many times, and we know this, right? If you come to the conclusion, I think
It's called accountability.
yeah, so I think it makes much more sense to appeal to the thing. I mean, at least to dig into the Bible first, or any objective.
Would you
truth
rather?
claim.
Would you rather? Let's say, for example, you got to choose somebody to be the president, and you don't know really anything about these two people, but one of them says, "I have literally never been wrong about anything ever," and the other person says, "Oh no, yeah, I've made mistakes and owned up to it." Who would you rather go with?
You can't call it. That's not a Nagalith. That's ridiculous.
It's not ridiculous at all.
No. It is
A
because we're talking about two
worldview that
human beings.
claims it's immutable and can never be true versus a
never be
system
false.
of investigating can never be false. Sorry, thank you. Versus a system that the way it gets better is by self-correction, which is how science works. To say that the thing that dogmatically says it can't be false is better in any way, I think that's just nobody thinks that that's actually a even like a logical or safe way to go about this world, doing anything, making any kinds of decisions, deciding what to believe in.
But I think it's silly when you're comparing two human beings that can absolutely be infallible, right? Compared to the creator of the universe is the claim that we're appealing to, right? So if they are telling the truth, then yes, absolutely, I would much rather appeal to the person or to the thing that claims to never have been wrong before. If the creator of the universe is behind
But you don't have any reason to back that up.
of course there's reason to back it up. Of
Such
course
as?
there is.
Okay. Actually, before we do that, the secular science is telling us that creation account is false, and that actually is the evidence. But then you just say, well, if it is true, then the science is false. Okay. How do we know that the opposite claim is true? Well, science has been wrong before. No, I'm telling you, how do we know that your claim is true? Well, it's the objective standard of truth. There's no justification here.
Yeah, you're right. It's either true or it's false straight up. There is no like, oh, you can't be wrong in one piece of it and right in the rest. If you're wrong in one of it, you're wrong in all of it. Is that what you're trying to say?
Nope.
What are you trying to say?
So I'm just basically where we're trying to get is on what grounds do you claim that the Bible is the ultimate source of truth?
Sure. I mean, I would say that the resurrection is the strongest piece of evidence. Like, I would say that's really the only thing that matters in Christianity, right? If the resurrection happened, Christianity is true.
Therefore, the earth was created in 6 days?
No, I mean, I think that the Bible in general, like, you can have different takes on whether or not the creation story is, um, I guess, like, symbolic or whatever, right? Like, you can make that argument, and I don't really think it matters too much. But
What then why can't the resurrection be symbolic?
because of the literary genre of Genesis verse the Gospels, right? Like, the Gospels are eyewitness testimony to events that took place. Two of
Well,
them,
I mean,
anyway.
I disagree on that too, but like I said, I didn't really want to have an argument about the Bible. Trying to
Well,
have an
it's
argument
tough to
about
not.
science, but also what counts as a good reason for believing in something, I guess.
What is a good reason to believe in something?
Yeah. Or
Like,
what
I
are
guess
good
it depends
reasons
on
to
what is
believe
that.
in claims?
I would say consistency. I would say the lengths that they go to prove it, obviously, such as dying for it, right? I'm sure that you've heard that argument a lot.
I mean, Jim Jones, there were like 900 people that died in his cult.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So it's either when you analyze that, it's like, okay, well, they're either telling the truth for what they believed in, or they were duped, right? But, like, I don't think any reliable or respected.
Donald Trump has convinced maybe like 30 million or more Americans that he won the last election, but he didn't. Jesus didn't have 30 million people believing in what he did within 4 years of his resurrection or whatever taking place. Jesus Christ ain't got shit on Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the evidence around the resurrection is the strongest piece of evidence for Christianity being true. I think that there is a very, very strong case that the events in the Gospels actually happened if you analyze it honestly in the same way that you would any historical text. I think if you go through the same process that you would in any historical text, you're going to come to the conclusion that they're telling the truth. Now, if you want to choose to not believe in that one because
What?
you just think
Okay.
it by the supernatural claims, then that's fine.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I was going. What to you counts as sufficient evidence that a miracle happened? People saying so in a book?
So, I mean, let's get on the same page, I guess, about what a miracle is. So, a miracle to me is any event that takes place outside of the laws of nature as we know them.
That
Right,
works
so-
for me.
So, would you agree that miracles can happen?
No.
So, you would say that the laws, we are completely confined to the laws as we know them.
I
There
have
is
no reason
going
to
out.
think that a supernatural realm exists. That's what I'm telling you.
Okay. So, but just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it can't happen, right?
Sure, I'm
know-
agnostic about it, but
I mean, it's difficult to even, like, talk about proving, because in order to prove something to your standard, it would have to be physical. But the definition of these miraculous claims is that they're coming from a non-physical world. So by definition, you would not be able to physically prove it or scientifically prove it.
well, we're doing this according to you, not according to me, because I asked you what would count as sufficient evidence that a miracle took place. Because I doubt
I
you're
mean,
a
I'll say
Mormon,
this.
despite the fact that there are written affidavits. We actually have the original affidavits for people swearing that they witnessed those miracles take place, which the Gospels are not that.
Yeah, I mean, Mormonism didn't start until, like, within the past 200 years. So, I mean, of course, we're going to have.
It's actually easier to believe in a lie the older the lie is.
I don't know about that. It's definitely not easier to prove.
Well,
It might be easier to
disprove,
believe,
but
like-
yeah. So, what counts as sufficient evidence for you to believe that a miracle happened?
One, the gospel writers had no reason to lie. I think that's a huge piece. Like, they got nothing out of it. Two, it did not align with again, the Jewish community's idea of the coming Messiah. They put things in there that would completely not help their case, such as reporting that women were the first witnesses, right? When women were not to be taken as reliable because they were emotional, could not be used in a court of law as witnesses, right? But yet they use them as their first witnesses. If you were trying to make up a lie, that's not something that you would do. You see people's lives completely turn around, such as Paul and James. James, the biological brother of Christ, does not believe that his brother is Christ or is God, completely denies him, and then has an interaction with him after he rises from the dead and turns into a believer. Paul, crucifying Christians, killing Christians, right? And then all of a sudden he ends up writing the majority of the New Testament. So lives turning around, I think, is a huge one. People willing to go to their death for what they claim to have seen is another one. And then I guess just the moral consistency of the Bible even today, right? Like there's not a piece of the Bible or a teaching of the New Testament that if you apply to your own life, your life will not inherently get better. So I would say consistency there is the big one. It holds up in any society.
You started out by basically claiming, the claim rests on, you sort of said the reason I believe it is because it actually doesn't make sense that they would make this claim. Mm-hmm. Which is, for that to be a justification, is like if I told you which of these things is more believable, I have $100 in a safe over there, or I have $10 trillion in a safe over there. Which of those is more believable?
Yeah, I would say the 100.
Okay. Now, let's say, hold on. Let's say that I bring in a guest and the guest says, no, yeah, he really does have $10 trillion in there. Now, all of a sudden, this fits with what you were saying earlier. Well, that it doesn't even make sense that somebody would agree or say, hell, I'll even get a woman to say it. It doesn't even make sense that a woman would say that, because that's the more unbelievable claim. If Peterson wanted to be believed, he'd go around telling us he only has $100, but he got this person to say that there's $10 trillion in there. Now all of a sudden it's more believable? No.
So let's say one of those people, the person that you just said, had a shotgun to their head, and they said, does he really have it? Tell me the truth. Yes. Okay, he's dead. Next person says the same thing, does the same thing, dies for it. Same person. Same exact thing.
What if 200 years from now I write a book saying that that's what happened, but there's no other evidence to support that claim?
Well, I mean, Bert Ehrman talks about this actually a lot. He talks about that there's 15 non-biblical sources. Like all of these arguments that you're making are things that atheist scholars strongly advise atheists to not argue on because they're silly. Like these are things that
really. I've heard Bart Ehrman talk about this. Bart Ehrman thinks Jesus existed. I don't go around saying Bart Ehrman or saying that Jesus didn't exist. Bart Ehrman thinks that the people that wrote those gospel stories believe. Maybe not every single detail, because there's stuff that's clearly added to them, but they believed that Jesus resurrected. I don't have any problem with that necessarily, but he also says things like, we have absolutely no idea what the original gospels said, because the earliest copies, like complete copies we have of them, are from 300 years after it all happened. And the partial manuscripts, when we go back and look at them, they're all different, and they actually get more different the farther back you go. Now, I would guess that they probably all say that Jesus did get crucified and that they couldn't find his body afterwards. And the part about the resurrection, like his body went to heaven, Jesus isn't even the first person to do that in the Bible, so I have no problem with them thinking that either. But that doesn't make it true, and I don't think that
last part again. I just didn't hear you. What happened with other people in the Bible?
Other people ascended into heaven Jesus isn't the first person to do it. I think like 3 people do that in the Bible.
Yes, but they weren't resurrected from the dead when they did it.
That's probably the case. Yeah. Jesus isn't the only resurrection of the Bible. He's not the only person to go for his body to go into heaven, but I think he's the only person to do both of those things.
Yes, yeah. Elijah was taken up into heaven.
That bald ass.
I have no idea the status of.
Isn't he the guy that the kid said go up the hill baldy, and then God had 2 bears maul 42 children?
I don't remember if he's bald.
Well, they said go up the hill baldy, so whatever. I mean, pretty based if you ask me, but whatever.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look, but anyway, I think that there's 4 things that we know historically are true, right? We know that there was a man named Jesus that roamed and preached. We know that man claimed to be God. We know that there was an empty tomb, and we know that people claim to have had seen him alive after he was crucified, right? We know those 4 things historically happened.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that people believed a lot of those claims. There was a Roman I don't remember which one, but there was a Roman emperor who people saw him within 3 days of him dying, 3 days after he died as well. I mean, this kind of thing happens. But yeah, we really don't have anything other than the stories of these things happening, written by nobody knows who, nobody knows when.
So just to circle back to the whole creationism argument, just to kind of keep us somewhat on track here, why do you think so many cultures have an ancient flood myth, and why do you think so many cultures well, let's start there. Yeah. Why do you believe that so many cultures have an ancient flood myth?
For a couple reasons. One, floods happen. People historically have lived in floodplains because floodplains have fertile soil, and floods would happen. I think another potential enormous influence is we know when the last ice age ended, the sea levels rose, and they rose really quickly. And the amount of land that got covered up by the water was equivalent to the size of North America. So I think a lot of people would have remembered, or they would have passed down, the time when they had to keep restarting their lives over and over and over and over and over again because of that. But I think probably the biggest thing about this, I think if you want to try to make sense of it, without appealing to a story that obviously couldn't have happened, the way it's told, is we can imagine dragons. Not the band, but actually imagining dragons.
It's funny you say that, because that was the other thing I was going to bring up, but I held off. I wanted to...
Dragons?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All kinds of cultures all around the world have invented hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of creatures that you and I don't think existed. I don't think dragons existed either, but gargoyles or the freaking Loch Ness monster or the Minotaur, for example. I don't think you believe in the Minotaur, right? Now, it just so happens that if everybody around the world, if all the cultures all around the world, they each invent tons of different mythological monsters, it's not really very surprising that in a lot of places there's one that pops up in a lot of them. Not even all of them, but a lot of them. But these dragons are completely different in these different mythologies as well. In Europe, they're flying gold hoarders. In the Ishkan-Tlahtoloyan, those are the people we call them Aztecs, but that's what they would have called themselves. Quetzalcoatl was lizard-like, but had bird feathers, right? In China, and I don't really know much about the nature of Quetzalcoatl. Maybe he was bloodthirsty, maybe he wasn't. Huitzilopochtli was pretty bloodthirsty, I think, but not necessarily Quetzalcoatl. In China, the dragon flies around, has no wings, and tells good fortunes and shit like that. They're actually not. They're sort of contradictory. There's just a common theme between all of them, which again isn't really all that surprising if people are just making up monsters. Oh, a lot of them have a reptilian-looking monster. Sometimes it flies around. That's that's expectable.
So with the flood myth, for example, not only do they just have like a flood myth, but it all kind of talks about the exact same thing, just using different characters, right? Like, for example, in Greek mythology, Zeus floods the world to wipe out humanity. And these two characters, they're the only survivors, are instructed by one of the gods to build a boat. And after that, the couple repopulates the earth. In Hinduism, it's the same exact thing, just a different character. Warned by one of the gods, builds a large boat, survives the flood, repopulates humanity. You see the same thing in Chinese mythology. You see the same thing in Native American mythology. Mesoamerican, Polynesian. When they're all the Bible, right? Mesopotamia. All of these things talk about the same story. And then I think another thing is
it's really not the same story. There are elements of it that are consistent, but it's not the same story. I mean, you know, in Nepal and North America, they both talk about Bigfoot. It's called the Yeti and the Sasquatch, and there are other places around the world that have it too. So, is there a giant ape man walking around, or was there? Is that actually good evidence of that, or is it merely a coincidence, or is it inspired by something else that's kind of sort of real, but not at all what the story's actually saying? Like, for example, they just got confused and thought they were what they thought was a Sasquatch was actually a bear, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's my exact argument, what you just said. Like, the fact that they're basically all the same story, just different twists of them. And yes, they do contradict each other. That's kind of like my point. And it's obviously based on something. And I don't think the fact that these things, all of these stories claim something specific, like the gods told them it would happen, building a boat, and then repopulating the earth, I think that is more likely to be based on something rather than they all made up the same exact scenario. Or they all...
I mean, like, floods happen. Like, in the... I had a conversation with a Bible scholar, Dr. Joshua Bowen, and we talked about this flood narrative. And in the older story from Assyria in the Near East, the reason that the earth gets flooded is kind of like almost the exact opposite of why it happens in the Old Testament. And I forget the exact details behind it, but it's just, well, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, and then as far as the dragons thing, I mean, they all refer to these giant reptilian creatures, right? They have depictions on walls of human beings hunting down these giant reptilian creatures. I mean, pre-1800, the entire world thought that the world was 6,000 years old, right? And then...
Well, I wouldn't say that. I don't think the Chinese thought that. I don't think the Native Americans thought that. It was a biblical tradition, but no, a lot of people were just very agnostic about it.
I think it was pretty accepted that the Earth was not millions of years old. I think this is a very new idea.
Well, we didn't have direct evidence to say that, so it would have been, it may have been kind of hard for people to give an actual number. But I've read some Aristotle, and he says that he writes about that. Surely there are areas which are now the sea, which have been dry land, and vice versa. And these events that change the surface of our planet must have been going on for, he doesn't like put an actual number on it, but you certainly wouldn't say only thousands of years, because for him, that was over 2,000 years ago. So for him, he'd have to be saying 4,000, and he would not have said something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar enough with that to really touch on it, but I think so. Dinosaurs, for example, right? The word dinosaur didn't exist until what, 1820 something, whenever it was. I forget exactly when they were discovered, but yeah, the word dinosaur didn't even exist. Right. It was just these giant reptilian creatures, right? Like they weren't even discovered.
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't know they even existed. People had found their bones, but didn't know what to think of them. And then people started to like put the bones together and be like, what the fuck? So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a good creationist argument to that would be these were just giant reptilian creatures that lived amongst people pre-flood, and that is the reason why human beings talk about mythical creatures like dragons. That's why, yeah, I mean, really,
I mean, there's zero scientific evidence to support that idea.
I wouldn't say zero. I mean,
I would. I've looked into this a lot.
I mean, carbon-14 in the bones. I'm sure you've heard this.
Sort of. Most of that, carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. No, I've never heard that. They say they find carbon-14 in diamonds, but that comes from a paper that was talking about the machine that measures carbon levels. Even if there's literally nothing in the machine, it measures a tiny bit of carbon-14. There's just background radiation all the time. And liars took that and said, haha, they're finding carbon-14 in things that are said to be millions of years old. That proves that they can't be millions of years old. So, but no, you don't date dinosaur bones with carbon dating. You use different methods, and not a single dinosaur bone has ever been dated to anywhere other than the window of time. Well, let's just say more recent. Oh, he left. Okay. Well, that wasn't really going anywhere anyways.